Hello, Emily. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having
Thank
me.
you for being here. Before we get started into talking about branding and all of that fun stuff, can you just introduce yourself and let us know what you do at PMU?
At PMU, I am a brand designer. I have the awesome opportunity to help people bring their visions to life by creating beautiful designs, all while targeting their target audience and their ideal client.
Absolutely. So today we're going to talk about brand refreshes versus rebrands, all of that fun stuff. But first, let's back up a little bit. Can you briefly explain what branding actually even is before we get into those nitty-gritty details?
Yes. So when it comes to branding, a lot of people question if that's really their logo, their colors, what exactly is it? But truly, when it comes down to branding, it is that experience that you're giving your clientele. So catering towards who you're speaking to with the colors that you choose, the voice, the values, all the experiences that go into how you want to make people feel is truly what your brand is.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. Okay. So and we get this a lot when it comes to our clients. This is why we're doing this episode is we have a lot of people who are very attached to their logos in the pet industry. Maybe they have a picture like, a logo of their dog, which I even have that in our logo and I'm really attached, so I really understand that concept of it. But maybe maybe whether they do have that logo and it's older, but they don't want to lose that. They have the brand recognition, all of that fun stuff. So I'd love to get into different options that they have for people who are like, I know I need something better, but I don't want to completely lose what I have. So what's the difference between like what are your options? What's a brand refresh? What's a rebrand?
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff that go into that. And my first thing always when people are explaining why their brand is important to them or why their logo is important to them is always approach everything with empathy because you never know the special meanings that are behind that, right? So with the whole feel good and all of that, we want to pay attention to that and carry those things over for them. So what that means is not necessarily maybe they realize that they need some modernization with their logo. We can strategically ask the questions that we need to our client to see what elements it is that we can carry over to still have it feel and make the nods to the things that are important to them. So when it comes to the two different words that sound exactly the same, rebrand versus refresh, a refresh truly is going to be like freshening it up, right? So maybe you need to take a step back and go to the basic rules of design, of logo design, and you need to make it work. So my number one rule is your logo needs to work in black and white. Otherwise, it's going to have a bunch of contrast issues. So maybe it's just helping flatten something that feels more like an illustration that is the current logo, making it so it works in super small spots, like up in the corner of a website, stuff like that, refreshing and still carrying over a lot of those elements. When it comes to a rebrand, that's really a whole nother conversation because that maybe you feel as though your mission statement doesn't work for you anymore. Your values don't work. You're actually maybe targeting the wrong group of people. So taking a step back with a professional and having them help you navigate what it is that you need to target the people that you want to target or that are going to be best for your business.
Gotcha. Okay. So with the rebrand, it's more like there's something that needs to be changed strategically within the brand in terms of like ideal audience, changing their services, like bigger issues versus refresh, which is like what we have is decent, but like we can enhance this a little bit more to modernize it. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yeah. You heard me
Okay.
right.
Okay, perfect. So what are some signs if somebody is listening to this and they are obviously not a brand designer, like what are some signs that they might only need a refresh versus that complete rebrand? What are they looking for?
Yeah. Good question. A refresh is like you don't want to change the core identity of who you are. Maybe your logo feels a little bit dated, but you like still want to be recognizable. So you want to carry those things over. That's when a refresh would be enough for you. As well as like a big one too is when your identity isn't consistent across platforms. So like you go to your Instagram, your t-shirts, your business cards, they all kind of have a different look and feel to them. Maybe like you have 4 different logos because you tried to make one yourself in the past. Somebody else created one for you that's close to you. And then you have a professional that made one for you and they're all over. Refresh will really tighten everything up. So that's another sign to look for. When it comes to the rebrand, it's really that whole overhaul again, like I described before. Like you just need to have a clean slate and launch something new and great and stick with that. And it should be timeless because that's what design should be.
And with rebrands, just like a quick question with rebrands though, like can you still carry over pieces of the old brand? So like you can still keep that brand recognition, but we are still making like larger changes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, absolutely. So if you want to talk about like the special elements that are important to you, or that might not necessarily even be our client's job to do that, right? Like we can help them diagnose what things are important. Like to give you a silly example of Kraft mac and cheese being a good one. They always, always, always have that noodle in there, even though they update it. It's still technically like rebrand because I can get into the nostalgia of it, but we'll save that for later.
I love it. And that's something too, I feel like with a lot of our clients, we run into this a lot where, for example, speaking at the Dogco Summit, we had people that came up and their specific thing was like they saw, and I had multiple people say this on the same exact slide. They went to a workshop and there were a whole bunch of logos on the screen, like of pet businesses in attendance to that workshop. And I had multiple people come up to me and they're like, yeah, I saw my logo in comparison to all these other logos and mine did not stand out. But I really like my logo because I've had it for, 20 years, that sort of thing. And so I feel like while we like our logo, I feel like there are instances where we can update it with a simple refresh. And I feel like that we do run into a lot of that with the pet industry, or even like you said, where they do have either multiple logos or there's not that consistency, or they, a lot of times if people just get a logo and they don't have brand guidelines, so they don't know how to use it, like they run into a lot of issues. So I like how you said about getting it tightened up and refined so that they have something very cohesive and clean and they know exactly how to implement it. And I think that's a big piece of it is being able to implement the brand.
Absolutely. That guidance is key, and your brand guide will help you guide through that.
Yeah. Well, let's get into some of those examples that you talk about because I feel like that can actually make this a little bit more tangible with brands that we're all familiar with. Like when you talk about like the nostalgia of Kraft mac and cheese, like how all that works. So I'd love if you could share maybe one or two stories of popular brands that have done this process.
Yeah. So a good example that goes to like technically being a rebrand, even though things look a lot similar, is one of my favorites. It's actually Dunkin' Donut. For a very, very long time, they were called Dunkin' Donuts. I'm sure a lot of us listening still refer to them as Dunkin' Donuts because their brand awareness is so high, but they actually are just Dunkin' now. And the reason why they went through that strategic rebrand is because they wanted to sell more than donuts. Like their ideal target audience started to be people that are in maybe their 20s to 40s. And those are the people that are running around getting coffee all the time. So taking away that donuts being so simple with that while still maintaining the same look and feel with like their colors and their fonts and their vibe is a great example of that. And also, like, needless to say, a name change is also a reason why you should do a rebrand, right? And that's an example of a name change, even though it's still like the same first part. I have a couple other ones that are like not so good examples, but it's still like a good learning lesson. And I think I want to say probably 82% of the people listening right now saw the Cracker Barrel instance, or maybe even 100%, who knows? But this one was a little bit different in a case where the rollout of this was such a shock to people who find Cracker Barrel so nostalgic. For me personally, I used to go there with my grandparents, and like the whole interior was like so special, and they changed that. The interior was part of the brand because your brand isn't just your logo, and people had a terrible backlash at it. And so much so that they had to go back to their original because people were so upset. Another good example of that is Gap Clothing. They went through a rebrand as well, completely changing the look of their logo. And the backlash was terrible too because they didn't roll it out correctly. They weren't strategic about it. They didn't warn the people, so it hurt people's feelings. And they also ended up having to go back to their original.
So why is the delivery of this just as important as the design itself? Why is it important? But also, like, what could they like? How do you do it properly then?
Yeah. So the why is it important? Because like I'll use the Cracker Barrel one as an example. People are so attached to, in that case, the nostalgia of it. People also, taking the nostalgia out of it, have that brand awareness of brands. So they're able to recognize it in like the blink of an eye. Our attention span is literally like 1.7 seconds or something like that. And when you change something up so drastically, you almost are risking it by having people not recognize you, and then you're going to lose people because, for example, Tropicana, the orange juice brand, went through one of these and they didn't roll it out correctly. They didn't warn people, go on socials and say, hey, this is happening, things like that. And then people couldn't even find what they were looking for on the shelf because it was so different. And then you're losing sales at the end of the day. That's why we all work, right? That's why we're all here. We quit. So to strategically do that, I think you need to take a look at first who your audience is. We're such a digital world these days. So a lot of times it's going to want to be on social media, starting to do teasers, starting to show tweaks or slowly start to implement the colors, slowly start to implement the fonts. That way people kind of like trick their brain into being like, oh, I do recognize that, rather than just being like, we're done.
Yeah. It's funny because I remember we had talked, I don't know, maybe like a month or two ago, and you were telling me about the Cracker Barrel thing, and I looked it up and I'm like, it's actually looks very similar. They just took out the guy, like for at least for the logo side of things. I didn't realize they like changed the interiors and stuff as well. So it's funny because objectively speaking, because I don't have like a nostalgic piece, to be honest. Hopefully no one takes the wrong way, but like I don't know if there are really like that many in Southern California. So it wasn't like a piece for me. So objectively looking at it, I'm like, oh, it looks a lot like cleaner. It looks modern, and it still looks recognizable to me because the font was very like it just looked cleaner to me. So it's just interesting when you have that brand recognition and you have loyal fans, what can happen when you update your logo. And we don't want to scare people into not doing this process. It's just a matter of implementing it slowly, like you said, getting teasers, or even perhaps, especially for local businesses like our clients would be, getting clients and like, do you recommend like getting clients involved in the process, like voting on, like, how do you recommend for small businesses like our pet care companies? How did they go through that process?
Yeah, an email strategy or whatever your form of communication is that is best for your clients. Maybe it's even like a piece of paper that you're leaving on their counter after you're done walking their dog or taking care of their cats or something. Just communicate, communicate, over communicate, because just letting them know, like, hey, these changes are happening. Maybe show them a teaser of some of the look and feel, just going back to let them know that it's going on. It's a good thing to get your clients involved, especially like in such a tight knit community, because then it's just going to obtain more trust with them and they're just going to not want to stop using you even more.
Yeah, for sure. And I think especially in the pet industry, since it is so like tight knit, it's so built on trust. Like that is a big, before over communicating and keep making them feel like they're a part of the process. I feel like that's so helpful. But that's also where brand refreshes can come in if you don't need that full rebrand, because it's not as much of like that shock when we're just making like subtle enhancements. It's like, oh, this feels clean. Like this feels like very tightened up, like in a good way. So that's where that refresh can kind of come in if you're able to do that.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay. So let's pivot a little bit from refresh versus rebrand. I know that something that's really important to you is building trust with your designer and having that relationship with your designers. And this is a perfect opportunity to talk about that. And I'd love to first just ask, why is trusting your designer such a crucial part of this branding process?
Yeah. Trust to me is absolutely everything. Once you have that trust even slightly broken, things are going to start to go down slower. It's just my key. A relationship that's built on trust is going to be more productive. It's going to be more collaborative. You know, the designer's going to trust that the client knows their business and their customers, and then they're going to trust us that we can deliver them a strong on brand identity. We also are very, very educated in this space. And sometimes, for the lack of a better word, it seems like it's a little bit more DIY. When we are professionals, we are constantly doing research. Things in the digital space are changing constantly. So we're up on the trends, we're up on what needs to happen, we're up on the tools. And I like to say, like, would you tell your doctor how to give you knee surgery? No, you wouldn't. So why would you do the same for anybody else? Now, that's needless to say, it is a very collaborative environment, and we want to hear what you have to say, and no idea is a bad idea because it might spark something great. So we always want to hear it. At the end of the day, if you trust us, you're going to end up having something awesome.
Yeah, for sure. Trust is so big. And that's, hey, this is what we talk about in the pet industry with like pets and like for our
Yeah.
clients and their clients. Trust is really important. And it's the same with your designer and yourself. And I'd love to talk a little bit more about what you wish clients understood about the strategy behind design. And I love that you even bring up the whole like timeless piece versus things that are trendy, because sometimes we do get that like, oh, this is something that's trendy, or this is, this is something that I might like personally, right? Like I love the color pink, but does that make sense for my brand? That sort of thing. So I'd love to talk a little bit more about like what strategy is behind the design process.
Yeah, for sure. So ultimately, design is problem solving. It's not decorating per se. Like every single choice that we are making is intentional. And if you're investing in a good design, it's going to save you headache and heartache from trying to like fix it and overdo everything. We want to make sure that we're intentionally attracting the right audience, communicating the values, and again, we're trained on how to do those things. As simple as if you're a very soft brand, we might do a simple thing like round a corner, and that's not something that somebody who's in the space would necessarily think of. But every little thing we do is so intentional, and I cannot stress that enough. We want the absolute best for our clients. We want to see them thrive. So of course we're going to pay attention to every little ounce.
Yeah, I love that. I've never heard that reference. Like design is problem solving, not decorating. I think that's so great because I think people do think that they're like, oh, like they just want to create something pretty. And maybe some designers out there are like, maybe that's their jam or whatever. But I feel like for us and for most designers, it's really about what's the strategy behind it, what's going on. Because I think also, I think sometimes what our clients struggle with is that balance between what personal preferences versus ideal clients are looking for or wanting. So that can be a struggle as well. So like bringing in that strategy component is so important rather than just decorating something pretty.
Yeah, for sure. I had thought of the comparison earlier and it didn't really make sense to bring up right now. But now that we're talking about like my favorite color is pink. Okay, yes, we do get that a lot, and that's great. Like, I do want to hear the types of things that you like. And it is a very niche category of designs that we are working on. But just to compare, if your favorite color is pink and you're designing for a football brand, those two don't correlate, and they're not going to correlate just the same as your clientele for your pet audience because pink is more feminine. Football tends to be a man's sport. So, like, you're not targeting the right thing. It applies the same way throughout whatever brand you're creating.
Right, exactly. And I mean, even by comparison, you could even look as like if you're doing outdoor pack walks or fleece group adventures, like that sort of vibe isn't going to necessarily be super feminine in most cases. Obviously, there's exceptions to every rule, but in most cases, you're looking at what is the overall vibe of what you're offering or what your values are in your business. And a lot of times it does encapsulate what you like. Sometimes when it's your own business, sometimes your personal preferences actually overlap with the strategy of your business because you're bringing so much of your values into it. It's depending. Like an example I always give is like Bayota Pet Care. And we'll give examples for everything, by the way, that Emily's talking about or I'm talking about so that you can see it visually in the blog post that goes with this episode. But Bayota Pet Care is one that was very like holistic, grounded, energy, eco-conscious kind of vibe. So of course we're going to have more earthy tones. And so it just makes sense. And those are her personal values, but she brought that into the business. And so it overlaps. So there are scenarios where that overlaps, especially in the pet care industry, because it is so personal, but it's not as simple as just saying, I like this color, so let's use it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so with you on that because especially when it's you, the one person taking care of the animals, or maybe you have a team, but they will be evoked one way or another. So it's fun to break the rules sometimes. And when you're allowed to, I say go for
Yeah,
it.
for sure. Okay, so for somebody, because I know we come across this a lot, for someone who feels very protective of their current logo, how do you help them feel safe while still guiding them through those sort of changes in the process?
Yeah. We want to, like I said before, really approach it with empathy. Like, I want to make you know that you are heard first. First and foremost, that's most important to me. I want you to feel seen. I don't want you to feel like I'm erasing something. I want you to feel like we're evolving something for you. And then once we get into working through the design, really like explaining the why we carried this over, why we chose not to maybe carry this part over, why we simplified this, how it's going to benefit you, just over explain, because next to trust, communication is my second. And I don't want you to leave with any questions. And I also want you to feel safe to ask anything because there's not a then.
Yeah. And I mean, ultimately, at the end of it as well, you are the one, or when I say you, I'm talking about like the listener or the client. You're the one with the final call, and that's something that we absolutely honor as well. So if it heads, that direction, ultimately, obviously, it's your brand and that sort of thing too. But we always like to give, if you're hiring a designer, we're giving our professional recommendation with what we're providing you, given everything that you've told us in terms of the strategy for the business, your values, what you currently have, how much brand recognition you have, and bringing that all together. It's a beautiful collaborative process. We love it. So,
Okay.
for someone who is wondering, I know we talked about this earlier in the episode, but do I need a refresh or do I need a rebrand? I want to give them something tangible to be like, okay, what's the first question that they should ask themselves as they finish this episode? Is this something I should be looking at and which option? What's the first question they should ask themselves?
Yeah. Take a step back and ask yourself if your brain reflects not only who you are, but where you want to be 5, 10 years in the future. And also, does it represent the values that you have for your brand?
Yeah, those are good questions. I like that. Okay. What is one small step that a pet business owner can take to evaluate the strength of their current brand?
Good one. Good one. I have actually gone through this process myself, and it's a little bit more unique than the cliche. I had thought of like be consistent with it, but we also can help you learn how to be consistent. So ultimately, I want you, the client, the person with the pet business, to go and ask 3 of your clients to describe your business in 3 words. And then I want you to go to 3 strangers and ask them to describe your business in 3 words. I don't want the strangers to cheat by reading your website and your services and everything. I want them to go based off of a feeling, off of the visuals and like your tone of voice. Okay. See if your client, because they might be biased, so it's a little bit harder, especially when it's like a solopreneur kindness, right? Somebody might radiate kindness, so that goes to their brand. And then compare the strangers to your clients, see if they align. And if some of them aren't aligning, then maybe you need to make it more clear. Like, again, we have such short attention spans and we only have a certain amount of time to portray what we want to feel. And you want to make sure you do it accurately.
That's really cool. I like that idea. Is that something that you recommend doing like regularly almost? I wonder, should they be doing that like annually? Because also things change. Or is that just something that you're like, oh, let's just evaluate it and then,
Yeah, it's only something that I've ever done when I've helped somebody go through a hefty rebrand or refresh, but I don't think that there's an issue with doing it. Maybe there's like a Q4 like questionnaire, but then again, I don't want people to rethink, do I need a rebrand every year or two? Because at the end of the day, if you're having it done correctly, it should be timeless and it should last you quite literally for the rest of your life.
yeah, that was going to be my next question is on average, how often should you take a look at your brand and be like, okay, is this still resonating? Should I consider a rebrand? Or do you have people coming to you like every 5 years? On average, obviously, again, there's exceptions to every rule of like things change and you change your business and you change your mind about stuff. But on average, if things are going well, you're growing at a steady pace, can you give an average?
I don't think I could. Like, because if you look at very, very big brands that have done this successfully, I'll go back to my mac and cheese or my Dunkin' example. You look up Dunkin' Donuts, all logos on Google. there might be like four since what I'm gonna throw stats that aren't real, but like 1950
Yeah.
and stuff like that. So I really think that design based on trend. Now, again, there's exceptions, right? You can break rules, but I think that it should be timeless and it should last.
Yeah. This is something I didn't actually plan on talking about in this episode, but I feel like it is really
Yeah.
relevant for the pet care industry because a lot of times we get people who say, and whether we did their design or someone else did, they have their brand and then they seasonally will change things because of holidays or like just literally this quite like the seasons, like summer, fall, winter. Can you talk about why that might not be a good idea to do or how you can honor seasons without messing with your brand?
Yeah. So my number one thing, I go to color, right? Say your brand is blue, orange, and green. You're going to be recognizable throughout those. But when Valentine's Day comes around, you're going to want pink and you're going to want hearts. No go, because people who recognize you through just the color are going to be like, where'd they go? Where'd they go? And also, there's just very strict rules. You should not ever tweak your logo. You should not add things to your logo unless, like, I have a brand that I work with that we have a special Thanksgiving color palette. We have a special Christmas color palette, but they're still like in the same neutral tones. So that's why if you're going to want to consider that, it might be something that you want to bring up to your designer and they'll tell you, like, while they're designing your brand, and they'll tell you if they think it's a good idea and if they recommend it for you. You got to be really, really careful because at the end of the day, it's brand awareness and little tiny tweaks can break that.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something I see quite often. And I get wanting to incorporate, I don't know, like Santa, or we've had situations where like people add like a Santa hat to a logo or change things up and it contrasts the brand so much and we don't want to do that. But do you have any suggestions on like how you can incorporate seasonality without updating your logo?
Yeah. Yeah. So you have icons, right? The icons are going to match the style of your logo. So if you have a line art logo, you're going to want your icons to be line art. If you have a logo that has gradient carried through it, your icons are going to want to carry gradient through it. So I'll always recommend going and at least getting a designer's eye on it. Needless to say, if you like want to try, but just always have that second eye. Even I need it, and I'm doing this every single day of my life. But say for Christmas time, you want a snowflake, you're just going to want to make sure you carry those same colors, the same way to the lines, the same exact style to a T, so it fits within there. We'd be confused if we saw, you know, the Nike swoosh. We'd be confused if we saw it all like line art squiggly. It wouldn't be the same brand, right? Well, that's just a
Yeah,
comparison.
the Nike swish is now a candy cane. It's not the
Yeah,
same.
correct.
Not the same. And a lot of times we don't really need it. It can also just be in the language that if you're making a flyer, it can be in like the language, like the actual text, but while keeping the integrity of the brand. Or like I think the big thing, yeah, if you did want to incorporate like snowflakes, for example, like whatever, that's something that can be done in the same exact style of your logo and with more brand icons. And people can, if you're a client of ours or if you want assistance with that too, that's something that we could even help with is if you want that seasonality. But I think it's overdone, to be honest. And that doesn't mean that you can't do that or that it's not necessarily a good idea or anything like that. But it's just something to be cautious of. We don't need to overdo it, I think. A lot of times we think we need to do a lot, but when your brand is super intentional, you don't need to. Less can be more, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And I like that you brought up the language too, because that's a huge thing. And if your tone of voice is fun, like have fun with it. If your tone of voice is serious, it can be just simple holiday wishes. It's just about paying attention and being
Yeah.
consistent with all that.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, do you have any final recommendations or anything else that you want to share when it comes to rebrand, refresh, trust, anything that you want to share?
Yeah, just one very, very last thing. And it goes with the stress of the business, everything that comes with it. don't put too much pressure on yourself when it comes to this. I know our VOP days are fast, but just take a second and breathe, because the progress that you're making is progress. I like to say, if you have 5% in you when you're going through huge updates like this, giving that 5% is your 100%. Don't burn yourself out. And before you make the decisions, just make sure that you're okay with making the changes, because it can be a huge change, especially when we're attached to certain elements and certain things. And just don't rush yourself. When the time is right, the time will be right.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And that's something too that if people are listening to this and potentially curious about what this could look like, you don't have to invest first before sending it to us, because we can always take a look at it and be like, all right, in your instance, I mean, obviously we would need to know a lot of information if we're really tackling this, but we could take a simple look and be like, okay, is this something that would be more of a refresh, a rebrand? Like, here's in general what we might recommend, just to get our eyes on it if you're wanting that. So there doesn't have to be so much pressure like, okay, well, I either have to go full force or nothing. We can definitely look at this for you too.
Yeah, correct. And we're always happy to hop on a call with our clients and help them diagnose. Helping is like kind of why I do design. I love to help people bring their visions to life and see the sparks in their eyes. So, like I said before, no question is a wrong question,
Yeah.
and always here to help.
Yeah. And you are our go-to for brand refreshes. You love doing brand refreshes, which is so fun.
Yes, I do very much. I love all aspects of design. I'm obsessed. I never sleep,
Oh,
and that's okay.
I love it. Well, speaking of which, I guess this is how I want to wrap up the call. We end every single episode with asking a mindfulness slash like reducing stress tip that you do in your daily practice. You sleep, but I'm curious what mindful tip or burnout advice that you implement in your regular life that you'd like to share.
Yes, I'm a liar. I sleep. But something that is super, super important to me, and this might be a different application for everybody, but I am on my screen a lot, like 10 hours a day plus. And art is something that's super, super important to me. I love art. I always have. And sometimes designing can suck that out of you. Like, you're feeling like you're constantly doing art. So, whatever that position is for you, just make sure you're not getting to the point where your battery's at 2% with your art. Make sure you stop when you're at like the 50% mark. Otherwise, you're not going to enjoy the things that actually bring you joy in life. And I think that can be applied for any passion
Yeah,
instance.
that's great advice. Well, thank you so much, Emily. You are the best. This was really fun.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me. It's always good to chat with you.